Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. I want to give you guys a quick reminder that I'm giving away a $20 Amazon gift card to one lucky viewer that leaves a comment on any video I upload this week on Storytime and my second channel Storytime. Leave as many comments as you'd like on both channels' videos this week, and you could be the lucky winner. That said, our first story of the day is by Jave285. Can I have ludicrous amounts of vinegar, please? My colleague and I used to survive our boring desk job by occasionally treating ourselves to the local chippy, often on a Thursday or Friday when we needed a pick-me-up. This was in the north of England, so I'm talking fish, chips, pies, sausage, gravy, etc. Decor from the 80s. The owners, simple, straightforward, humorless working folk. Usually I get fish and chips with a bit of salt and ketchup. I never liked vinegar on chips as I find it too acidy and it makes them go all soggy. My mate, however, loves vinegar on his sausage and chips, and just as we're walking to the chip shop, he tells me how they never put enough vinegar on them. I say to just ask for some more then. He says, fine, I will. We go in and order, and the girl behind the counter plates them up in those little polystyrene trays. She asks if we want salt and vinegar. My mate says yes. Can I have ludicrous amounts of vinegar, please? Cue malicious compliance. The girl unquestioningly picks up the vinegar bottle and starts shaking it over his chips, looking him straight in the eye the whole time. To this day, I don't know if she was flexing on him in a call my bluff kind of way, or just humorlessly and obediently carrying out his request. She adds 10 seconds worth of vinegar and is still staring at him for confirmation that it's enough. My mate is either too proud or too awkward to tell her to stop, so he just stands there looking on as his meal is slowly ruined. Meanwhile, the little tray is slowly filling up with vinegar. Finally, after 15 to 20 seconds of vinegarization, she stops and puts the bottle down. My mate says thanks quietly and watches as his tray of food, now close to overflowing with vinegar, is wrapped up and passed to him. At this point, I'm trying not to piss my pants. We go back to the office and, inevitably, the vinegar has soaked through all the paper wrapping the meal, and my mate spends most of his lunch break trying to peel soggy strips of paper from his food. I ask, they give you enough vinegar this time? He says, just about. When going to a place like Subway, where you literally order what you want specifically and watch them assemble it, do you find that personally to be an awkward or stressful situation, or is it no breeze for you? Let me know in the comments down below. This next story is by Angelera74. Serve the cake. This happened 30 years ago. It was the second job I ever had in my life, taken because the owner's son at my first job fell in love with me and became abusive and enraged that I was dating someone, and I ended up quitting after locking myself in a bathroom for an hour for my own safety. But that's another story. This was a tea room, and they catered events. My first shift, we were catering a wedding. I had been told to wear my best wedding clothes. I wore a beautiful white blouse and a lovely skirt. I arrived at the venue, served the wedding, and then I got to wash every pot and pan in the kitchen at the venue. My wedding clothes were ruined, and in addition, I got yelled at for leaving contamination on a pot that I seriously doubt had been scrubbed clean in my lifetime. I was pretty mad, but I needed the job, and I thought it would surely get better. I was wrong. My next shift, I was serving in the tea room. I was pulled aside and told by the owner that I was to forfeit all of my tips and work only for my base pay. Because I was young and I didn't need the money, and her son was in jail and he needed it more than I did. I reckon that she had no way of tracking cash tips, so I resolved the issue by making sure I got generous tips and pocketing half. Not illegal, and she had no way of knowing, and I could keep the job. The next time I was called in, I was told to head down to the basement. This was apparently a religious place. I had no idea, and everyone was in the basement singing hymns while chopping watermelon and putting it in a blender. This was for watermelon punch, to be served the following day at a catered event. The blender being used was old and standing in an inch of water. It kept mildly electrocuting those of us lucky enough to be tasked with using it. I was pretty rapidly reaching the end of my patience. My next shift, I was working their catering event. This one was actually fine. Maybe the only shift where there was nothing completely insane going on. My next shift was my last. The tea room had a display case filled with beautiful cakes and pies. Customers could select what they wanted. A huge party of 30 people came in. It was explained that since we did not split tips, I was responsible for serving this party all on my own. I think the party was given to me because the owner felt it would be a big tip and knew I would be forced to give it to her after. I slaved running back and forth, taking orders, serving drinks, rushing out food. I managed it all, and in the end, I got a huge tip. I kept half and gave her half, and I said nothing. As they were leaving, I was seated again, this time a party of 2. I was exhausted, and this meant I would be working past my scheduled shift. I sucked it up and served them. At the end, they walked over to the display case and chose dessert. I pulled the desserts out and one was moldy. I showed the owner, and her response? Serve the cake. I suppose I could have argued, and I truly felt bad for the customer, but this was all I could take. I was exhausted and I was done. I served the cake. It was not long before the mold was noticed. When I walked out that final time, the owner was yelling at the customer who was screeching back. Predictably, she tried to blame me. I just cursed her out, told the customer the truth, and left. If you can afford to quit, there's truly some jobs out there that are just not worth sticking around for. This next story is by I Can Sleep 24/7. Don't want to listen to me? Okay, I'll keep the extra money. This will probably be one of the pettiest posts on this subreddit. The malicious compliance ended up costing the jerk Rs 100, which is just slightly more than $1, and it isn't about the money. What I got out of this was a boatload of satisfaction that no money can buy. Context: I was in college and I'm from India, so I'm at a local eatery near my college. It was a usual hangout spot for a lot of college students. The owner/manager was a real jerk, and I'll be referring to him as such, specifically towards the college students, assuming that we were always rowdy and bad crowd in general. Typical Indian middle/old age mentality. Cue to one day, 4 of us went there and ordered chocolate milkshakes for 2 and Oreo milkshakes for 2. I don't remember the exact total, but I do remember that he ended up giving me Rs 100 more in change than I should have gotten back. I realized this after I had taken the order back with me to our table. I went back to return the extra Rs 100. Now, just so everyone knows, I'm not that extroverted and I'm not good with crowded places, and the eatery was quite busy. Lots of people placing orders and all, so I just waited for a while, probably 3 to 4 minutes. The owner glanced towards me 2 to 3 times. He kept staring daggers at me. After the said time, the crowd had reduced a bit. I said, "Excuse me," to which he responded with a "What?" in the worst tone ever possible. He actually replied in Hindi, which, with his tone, sounded much more condescending than a simple "what" can ever sound. Anyways, I started off with, "I think you gave me the wrong change." And before I could explain any further, he simply walked away and started talking to another customer. I waited for another minute and then said, "Excuse me," again. And he replied with, "You should have counted the change when you got it. Go away now." I said okay and walked away. The Rs 100 isn't really much. I consider that to be rudeness fees that I got to keep. Let's be real, considering it's slightly more than $1, if you went and you bought anything anywhere and they accidentally gave you an extra $1, I'm willing to bet $1 that 99.9% of us would all keep that extra $1. It's free money. This next story is by Timondius. Go back home and shave. Okay. Another story from years ago at McDonald's. I turn up to my shift and I'm told a few minutes after clocking in that I don't look presentable. I worked kitchen and I was about 20 at the time, so after a couple of days of not shaving, it could have been a 5 p.m. stub at most. I'm told to go home and shave properly for my shift. I go. I lived 5 minutes away. I get in the shower, get a hot towel, shave carefully. I dry it off, put the hot towel back on, apply the whole treatment, aftershave, lotion, etc. Make sure it's perfect. I turn up to work about an hour later. "Where have you been? What took you so long?" "You told me to go back home and get a proper shave. I hope that's better." You actually really can't overstate how much of a luxury it is to be so close to your workplace. For anybody that has to travel any amount to get to work, imagine it's only a 5-minute drive. For a lot of people, that sounds like heaven. And our final story of the day is by BlackFang321, who needs an attendance policy anyways. For 7 years, I worked for a major internet provider in the United States. Most existing technicians were a part of a union, and had been for quite some time. They had an impressive array of benefits, and an impressive hourly pay as well. To get around this, whenever the ISP rolled out the newer fiber-based internet, TV, phone, they would create a new technician position for completing the installs and repairs. Since this new position wasn't covered by the union contract yet, it has to be voted on and whatnot, the ISP would get a year or two of running these guys ragged for minimal pay and benefits. I was one of those guys. Hired on for less than I was making as a department manager working retail in order to work 50 to 60-hour weeks. Once we joined the union, it became better benefits and pay, but some things got weird. We were an addendum in the contract that covered the old-timers, and as such, a lot of our rules weren't really specified. Honestly, it felt at times our position's benefits were used as a bargaining chip by the old guard to get what they wanted. But I guess that isn't really what's important to the story. What is important to the story is, we didn't have an official attendance policy at all. Whenever you would look up the attendance policy in the handbook, it'd tell you to see your manager for details. I finally managed to get a copy of what the manager's handbook said, and it wasn't good. Basically, it recommended using common sense when deciding attendance discipline. Our local managers interpreted this to mean advance to the next step of discipline unless it was literally illegal to do so. This led to some weird situations. One time, after a particularly long install in the southern summer running lines through an attic, I wasn't feeling too well. Definitely signs of dehydration, a headache, dizziness, wasn't thinking clearly. I called up my boss and said I need to pack it in for the day. He hummed and hawed over it, didn't sound happy, but after reminding him that we were constantly told safety is our responsibility, aka if something goes wrong it must have been our fault, he allowed me to return to the garage. Once I was at the garage, however, he told me that in order to not count as a complete absence, I'd need to go to the doctor and file for FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. This was one of my first malicious compliances, because in order to qualify for FMLA, you have to miss at least 3 days. So, because they wanted to put up a stink about it, I went to the doctor, gave him the paperwork, and took the next 3 days off. Turns out I was, to the absolute shock of no one, denied FMLA. Fortunately, when they tried to write me up for attendance, I pointed out that not only did I have permission to stop working that day before returning to the garage, but I was following their instructions by filing for FMLA. They tried to say, in that case, we'll only keep the write-up on file for 90 days, and then remove it if you don't have any other absences. The union rep didn't buy that one either. The write-up got torn up before we left the office. But the whole experience taught me a weird lesson about how they handled sick days and occurrences. See, we got 5 paid sick days, but they weren't excused sick days, which meant you could be fired before even using them all, since management decided each absence was an instant step of discipline regardless of reason, despite their guidelines saying to use common sense. But there was a catch. Concurrent absences only counted as one occurrence. Missed 1 day? That was one occurrence. Missed 5 days in a row? Still only one occurrence, even if it was separated by a scheduled day off. It was the one rule that was specified in the manager guidelines. You can bet I sure as heck shared that information with all the other technicians. If you were out a single day due to illness, you might as well take an entire week off with pay because you'll never get to use that time otherwise. The managers hated me for it, but I was a bit bitter over the whole FMLA thing and would share that info every single time it came up. They'd threaten to write me up for insubordination, but I'd just tell them we could discuss it in the presence of my union. After all I was doing was sharing information on the attendance policy. The same policy that they used to screw us every chance they got. I just don't see what ground they have to be upset about you following policy or using the policy. They're the ones that published it, they're the ones that put it out there. Ain't OP's fault they can use it effectively. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you have a favorite story of the day, let me know which story and why in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you haven't, subscribe and turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. No matter what you do, whether it's just viewing the video, liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, I appreciate the heck out of it. Every little thing that you do helps the channel grow that much more, and I can't thank you enough for it. So, until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll be right here next time on the Storytime channel.